In a peaceful suburban neighborhood, the sound of children playing echoed through the streets, and everything seemed calm. But as the sun began to set, a little girl ran toward a squad car, her face twisted in fear. She was crying, terrified, begging the officers, "Please follow me home." The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the quiet suburban neighborhood. Cars were parked along the curbs, and the sound of children laughing could be heard from a distance. It was the kind of evening that promised safety and peace, where the world seemed to slow down and everything felt normal. But then, the stillness was broken. A small figure appeared at the edge of the street, running toward the police car parked nearby. Her dress, a soft pink, fluttered in the wind as her feet pounded against the pavement. She was crying, tears streaming down her face, her tiny body shaking with fear. The officers inside the car were just finishing their routine patrol when they saw her approach. The sound of her sobs pierced the calm, her distress unmistakable. She didn't hesitate. She ran straight toward them. The officers, initially taken aback, quickly slid out of the patrol car. The little girl came to a stop in front of them, her chest heaving as she struggled to catch her breath. Her wide eyes, filled with terror, locked onto the officer closest to her. In an instant, her fears seemed to spill over. "Please," she choked out, her voice trembling. "Please follow me home. I'm scared. I don't want to go back there." Her words were barely audible, but the desperation in them was impossible to ignore. The officers exchanged a quick glance, their confusion mounting. They hadn't expected this. A child, no older than 6, standing alone on the street at dusk, begging them to follow her to a place she clearly feared. They tried to reassure her, asking gentle questions, but the little girl was beyond calming. She only shook her head, her hands clutching the hem of her dress as if holding on for dear life. "I don't want to go back. Please," her voice cracked with sobs, her feet shuffling anxiously as she looked down the street, as though she was afraid someone might be watching. The officers didn't know what to think. But one thing was clear, something wasn't right. The two officers stood there for a moment, silently processing the child's desperate words. The girl's tear-streaked face was a stark contrast to the peaceful neighborhood around them. Officer Mitchell, the older of the two, rubbed the back of his neck. He wasn't sure what was going on, but the situation felt wrong. He exchanged a glance with Officer Stevens, who had remained silent up until now, his brow furrowed in thought. "I don't know, Stevens," Mitchell said softly, his voice filled with uncertainty. "Maybe she's just scared, you know? Kids get scared at night sometimes." But his voice trailed off as he looked back at the girl, still clutching her dress and staring at the street nervously. Stevens took a step forward, kneeling down to the girl's level. "Hey, it's okay. We're here to help. Why don't you tell us what's going on?" he asked gently, trying to ease her fears. But the girl didn't answer, only shaking her head in desperation.
It was then that Stevens felt it. Something in her gaze, something that told him her fear ran much deeper than just being scared of the dark. "Mitchell," Stevens said quietly, his voice steady. "We're following her. Something's not
right." Without another word, they both nodded, silently agreeing to go with her. The walk to the little girl's house felt longer than it should have. Each step the officers took seemed to add weight to the air around them. The girl's pace was quick, her small feet barely keeping up with the officers as she led them down the street. Her eyes flicked nervously over her shoulder, as though she was afraid of being followed. Every now and then, she'd glance at Officer Stevens, her silent plea still evident in the tension in her shoulders as they neared the house. The officers' concerns deepened. The streetlights flickered in the distance, casting shadows across the yard in front of the small, run-down home. The house itself appeared unremarkable at first glance, a faded paint job, an overgrown lawn, and a broken porch light. But there was something off about it. The air felt thick, and the closer they got, the more uneasy the officers became. The girl stopped at the front door, her small hand trembling as she reached for the doorknob. She hesitated for a moment, her body stiff. "Please don't leave me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Stevens gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "We're not going anywhere," he assured her. With a shaky breath, she opened the door, revealing the interior of the house. It was eerily quiet. The smell of something stale hung in the air, and the house seemed darker than it should have been, As though the light itself had been drained as the officers stepped inside, a chill ran down their spines. The living room was a mess, overturned. Furniture, dirty clothes scattered across the floor, and an unsettling stillness in the atmosphere. And then, they saw it. The kitchen door, ajar, leading into the shadows beyond. The officers exchanged a brief, knowing glance as they stepped
Further into the house.
Every creak of the wooden floors echoed through the stillness. The girl clung to Officer Stevens' side, her wide eyes darting nervously to every corner of the darkened space. She seemed to want to speak, but her voice caught in her throat. As though the weight of the words she needed to say was too much for her to bear, Stevens moved cautiously, his hand resting on his gun, though he wasn't sure if he'd need it. The air in the house was thick with tension, and something in his gut told him that every moment they waited brought them closer to something dangerous. "Stay close," Mitchell murmured as he surveyed the room. His voice was low, but there was an edge to it. The house felt wrong in a way that was hard to explain, as though something had been left untouched for too long, like a dark secret lurking just beneath the surface. The girl pulled at Stevens' sleeve, urging him toward the kitchen. He nodded, signaling Mitchell to follow as they moved toward the open door. As they passed the hallway, Stevens noticed an unsettling sight, a series of framed photographs on the wall. The images, once bright and full of life, were now covered in a thin layer of dust, their colors faded with time. They were pictures of the girl, but the smiles in the photos didn't seem to reach her eyes. Her expression seemed too serious, too haunted for a child her age. They reached the kitchen door, and Stevens hesitated. He had no idea what they were about to uncover, but the girl's trembling form told him everything he needed to know. And then, he stepped inside. The moment Stevens stepped into the kitchen, everything clicked into place. The smell was overpowering. A mix of stale food and something else, something sour, almost metallic. His eyes scanned the room, quickly taking in the disarray. Dirty dishes piled high in the sink, broken glass scattered across the floor, and a refrigerator door that hung ajar. But it wasn't the mess that made his stomach twist. It was the sight of the small, curled-up figure lying motionless on the floor. A man, clearly unconscious, was sprawled on the ground next to a tipped-over chair. His hands were bloodied, and his clothes were stained, but the moment Stevens saw the girl's fearful glance, he knew the truth. "Call it in," Mitchell said, his voice hard and urgent. "Get an ambulance now." Stevens quickly stepped forward, gently guiding the girl out of the room as Mitchell pulled out his phone. The child's face was pale, her body trembling as the realization of her escape began to sink in. "We've got you now," Stevens whispered, offering her the comfort he could. "You're safe." Minutes later, the ambulance arrived, and the girl was taken into protective custody. She was too young to understand what had just happened, but she knew she was safe. The officers exchanged a glance, both of them silently, acknowledging the enormity of the moment. They had saved a life today. As the ambulance drove away, its sirens fading into the distance, Officer Stevens stood on the porch, staring at the now empty house. The weight of the moment was heavy in the air. He glanced at Mitchell, who nodded silently, both men knowing they had just altered the course of one young girl's life. Stevens looked down at the photograph on the wall, a picture of the little girl smiling, finally free of fear. He felt a quiet sense of relief. "Sometimes, it only takes one act of courage to save a life," Stevens whispered. "Today we did that."